have seen on Lisa's live on Friday that I think a few people asked for various things to be covered in the live, so I've tried to cover that today for you. So you would have seen that I posted I was going to make an easel card. Now I know we've done these before, but I think it's always useful to sort of recover and go through just the different techniques, because I know we have new people joining us all the time, and I tried to do something a little bit different this time. I've created a shaped easel card, and I've used the brand new oval dies, the nested stitched bubble dies. But what you can bear in mind when I'm doing this is that it can easily be transferred if you wanted to make a circle easel card. So we have a couple of sets of nesting circle dies too, don't we, from Lisa? So all the techniques and the method in how I put this together can easily be transferred to that. So this is the card I've got today. It's a lovely little card actually, it's a cute card. Let me see what the largest size on the die, on the oval die, which would be the size of the card that I've made today, is 120 millimeters high. And then we have 7 dies in this. Let me just get the dies for you. So this oval set is actually broken down into 7 dies, and we get an awful lot of metal for our money here. We really do. And we have a couple of stitch dies which create our frames like this. Also, these can be solid if you use just one die. I just wanted to create the frame. And we have a second layer that goes in the centre. Then we can create another stitched bubble die. And then we have the smaller dies that go into the centre as well. So it's a really lovely and a really useful set. So you can see the way that I've created the easel card here. It would fold down to go into an envelope. Now, because of the nature of using acetate, it doesn't fold down as flat as if you were making this with just cardstock. And of course, this can, whatever techniques I use, you can just substitute out the acetate if you don't want to use acetate, or if you haven't got the acetate. And you can use cardstock, it would be exactly the same method to create the card. You say this can fold down to fit into an envelope, or you can make a box for it. And then, as most easel cards will need, is a stopper at the bottom here, and I've just used a sentiment and a couple of snowflakes. But I'll just show you around, and hopefully actually I've changed the background so it's a lot darker. So while I'm working with acetate, hopefully it means that you can actually see what I'm doing. Hopefully that sort of works for your computer screens also. But you can see the mechanism of the easel card here is that I have actually created it all from acetate. Now, depending on the embellishments that you use, and depending on the embellishments you use, you can actually create this to be sort of quite see-through, as I have done here. But if you wanted to use a floral die and just use a banner around the outside, then obviously you're going to have a lot more of this being open. If you didn't want to use just this frame and you wanted to use a layer behind this, then also you've got that option too, you see, and that will change the look of that card completely. But it's really nice to have options, and the fact that you have the acetate, even if you were more solid in the centre here, the fact that you've got the acetate around just gives a really sort of fresh feel, I think, to the easel card. Obviously today I'm using the Sleigh again. I really like this one, and I've used just 2 colours to ink the Sleigh up, and that works just really well. I haven't worried about separating out the colours for the foliage. I think the foliage works perfectly well with the colour scheme. So just 2 colours, so we can make that quite straightforward when I stencil that for you a little bit later on. The snowflakes sitting on the bottom here are from the little robin set, which Lisa will have on her show later on this evening. So we've got two really useful little snowflake dies there. This robin would also look fantastic sitting in the middle of the acetate too, wouldn't he? So, and it's a perfect little size. Let me just show you the size of the robin die. I know Dawn's already done this on a live, but look how cute and tiny he is. He would sit perfectly in the centre of an oval, wouldn't you think? So that is just another option. So this might be something, if you manage to get this die set later on, or if you've managed to sort of go shopping already, then this would be a perfect style of card to create too. So there's two things I want to do really. I want to show you how the card's made, and I want to stencil. Actually, what I've noticed with all these products that I'm using today, they are all of the A6 size. So we have the stencils, these Sleigh stencils, which are A6. Obviously the embossing folder, which includes the die for the sleigh, is A6, and also the packaging for the ovals is A6. So it's a nice little gift set actually. So I'm just going to stencil this, to say, in two colours. It's going to come together really quickly. You can be more in depth with this because there is so much detail on these stencils, and I have done previous videos where I have used a lot more colours. But today I will just keep it quite straightforward. So I'm using the interference dies today. I'm using, these are two from the new set, release 2. So we have Opal Blush and we have Lavender Fields. And we have our sponge applicators, which is probably the preferred way to apply the interference inks. They don't respond too well to the blending brushes, but if you want to use the smaller stencil brushes, the little white ones, just the details, then they would be perfect. But I do actually get on quite well with the blending sponges. So because I'm using just the two colours, I'm going to be putting the colour of the ink down in various intensities, I suppose. I'm not going to go too dark on all layers, because we can get that element of shading, and although it's not quite monochrome, the same way as we've done with the anthracite inks, you know, those sort of techniques where you, for the earlier layers of your stencils, you put down your ink a lot lighter, because then it allows you to build the colour on top of the later layers, if you see what I mean. So always bear that in mind when you are stenciling. So with layer 1 and layer 2, I shall come in with the Lavender Fields. Again, I should keep this layer quite light as well, because I'll prefer to actually come in with a lot more denser colour a little bit later on. Now, the way I stencil, I always prefer to stencil from one direction, and in doing that you'll find you'll get a natural element of shading to your layers of ink. So if you see that purple layer that I've just added there, what would be the bottom layer, or the bottom section of that sleigh, is actually a lot darker, which gives the illusion of a shadow. And I get that, and you see it slightly on this blue layer here. I get that because I sort of prefer, and I don't always think about it, but it always gives me this result. I always apply the ink from one direction more than I do another. It's just the way sort of I've naturally sort of placed the ink. But it does give me that shading, and if you notice, I'll be shading from this direction and upwards, or say from here to this way, which means anything on this side will always be a lot darker than on this side. And I think, as I say, I do it without thinking really, but it does give you that lovely sort of airbrushed graduated ink look. So that might just be something you want to think of if you perhaps struggle getting a really nice a shadow look with your inks. Now these smaller areas, and I will concentrate the ink quite a lot, so we won't have too much shading in that area, but on these larger areas, you can see that you will end up with a darker line, which gives us a really sort of nice shadow line there. And a really nice definition between the two areas of stenciling too. So we're on stencil number 4. So I should come in with the lavender field. I should go quite light, because especially on the parcels, because I know that we've got some detailing to go onto the top of that, and I don't I really want that detailing a bit later on just to show through. Now the candy cane won't have any extra detailing, so I try and just put a little bit more ink through that than I did the parcels. And I do actually find it quite easy to blend with the sponges, because the way that these stencils are spaced out, you can actually highlight that candy cane away from the parcel. So once I take this away, you'll see the sort of the different intensities of colour that I've put down there, just with one stencil and just with one colour and one sponge. So now you'll see that we come in with the details for the parcels, and I want to go a lot darker, so I should put plenty of ink on my sponge and really make sure that I get those details going on through there. Now I don't know if you're familiar with using the interference inks, but when you're using them with a sponge, I find that sort of swiping the sponge over the top of the ink pad there picks up the ink a lot more than perhaps dabbing it. That's just my personal preference, so it'd be interesting to know if you find the same. We have the flower on this side, so I just put a little bit of ink through there, not too much. Again, I'm just wiping the ink from one direction upwards, and that gives me that natural airbrushed blend through that part of the stencil there, if you can see. So we're on stencil number 6. So we have the detailing on the bottom of the sleigh, and I will use blue this time, so the opal blush, and I will go in quite dark on this all the way along. Now of course, once we finish this stenciling and the ink has dried, we'll have the benefit of all the mica coming through to really make this sleigh even prettier than it already is. So we have the candy cane, and we have the bows and the gift wrap on the packaging there, so I think we can afford to go quite dark on those as well to make those stand out. We have our flower, which I always seem to forget about, so I won't do this time. So I'll put that detailing with the blue and just add a little bit to the top here. Again, I like that airbrushed look, but there's no reason why you can't make that a completely solid colour. There we are. Right, stencil number 7. Right, we're going to have a couple of stencils here which are going to be putting the foliage onto this part of the stencil. So the stencils look very similar. I shall do one in a lighter pink and one in a darker pink. And it's also worth noting, there's been a couple of comments where people have perhaps struggled to line up their stencils as they go, and things aren't quite meeting quite the same way. But if you notice, when you put your stencils onto the pegs here, there is ever such a tiny amount of wiggle room. I mean, it really is, and it's bound to happen, because if Lisa made these holes exactly the same size as the pegs, we would struggle to get them on and off. So there has to be that slight bit of wiggle room. But what it does enable you to do, if perhaps things aren't lining up a little bit, it gives you just that little bit of space. Can you see that move in there? Just make sure that when you put that down, that you have lined that up against what you've stenciled underneath, and hopefully that may just eliminate some of those issues you'll find in some of your designs not matching up. As I say, it's really only tiny, but it can make a big difference, I think. The other way to do it is just with this wiggle room, just make sure that when you put the stencils on, that you've either shifted the stencil all the way to the left or the right, or downwards, or in the same orientation each time. And I think that will also help you just get that precision a little bit more if you are struggling with that. So hopefully that will help. Oh. Okay, so that's the first layer of foliage, so I shall come in with this one and come in a lot darker. There we are. You can see the difference there just by adding different amounts of ink through the stencil. You have light leaves and dark leaves just using the one colour. So we have the last stencil now, which is stencil number 9, and I will use, I will come in with the pink again, but I shall do it quite light this time, because I want the pink over this part of the flower here. There we are. So that's your image stenciled just with 2 colours. I really don't think you need any more. Obviously you can go to town, but if I just perhaps even, I don't know if you'll be able to catch that mica if I just tilt that, but if you've used these inks before, you know that as this dries, that shimmer will really sort of become more alive over the next minute or 2. Okay, what I will do now, because I didn't before, I do need to die cut this and emboss this. So there was another message also about lining up your dies. It really is a case of just taking your time, and it is worth taking your time at this stage, just to line up those dies. Oh, so they do fit around what you've just stenciled, and just sort of move and sort of manipulate that a little bit, because then once you find that one area is lined up, just hold that firm, and then it allows you just to move the rest of the die a little bit, because you say it does just take a minute, but it's always worth taking that extra few seconds just to make sure that lines up. And if you do struggle with holding it through the die cutting machine, then do put your tape on as well. Alright, I should bring the die cutting machine in and put that round here. Right, the other thing I found, that when you're die cutting with this, it can, if you're positioning your die on the wrong place on your plates, on your cutting plates, then that can actually push the die out of alignment also. So I would try and suggest to always put your image either in the centre or perhaps just further back on your plate. Don't put it up on the front section, because I find, and this is just me sort of personally, it might be different with other die cutting machines, I find if I put it up too high and then I put the plate on, just the movement of pushing the plates through the rollers initially can be enough just to push the die out of alignment. Whereas if you set it back just a little bit and put your plates on, you have all of this space to get your platform through the rollers and set before it reaches your die cutting. So that might just be something to think about as well. And I know that Lisa has always said that when you're embossing, don't sit your embossing folder, or particularly the hinges, too high up on the cutting platform. For a similar sort of reason, it puts too much pressure up at this area of the cutting platform. So that might be just another thing to bear in mind. So you can see that we've die cut that now perfectly, and the white edge all the way around is nice and even. So I will emboss this for you now, and then we can go ahead and start constructing the card. So just as you take your time lining up your die with your stenciled image, it's worth taking that time again to line up your die cut in your embossing folder. Okay, and I'm sure many of you that are watching at the moment are familiar with this, but we do have a lot of new people join us all the time, so I think sometimes it is just nice just to cover that again. And there's all... not concentrating on what I'm doing, I put too many plates on there. It is nice just to sort of cover the basics every so often, isn't it? Because there's always new people to the craft, which is great. And it can be quite a daunting thing when you've got so many sort of tools and things in front of you and you're just learning everything. And I think if you're a little bit impatient and you want to do everything all straight away, you don't always take everything in straight away, do you? Okay, so there we are. So we have that lovely embossed image, and that's now ready to go on the card. So let's just move all of this out of the way now. Okay, to construct the card, you don't necessarily need a card blank because it's something that you will actually be creating for yourself, because it's completely bespoke as well. So you need yourself a piece of, I'm using white card, you can use coloured card, but this is basically, it's going to be the base. And I've used textured cardstock on this one. So you need a good sturdy piece of cardstock, I would say. And then you need, so that is the largest oval, largest layer of the ovals cut for the base of the card. Then you need a further 2 layers cut, so one full layer cut from acetate, again, which is the largest of the oval dies. The second piece of acetate, you'll notice that we have a bit missing. That's mainly because I could cut 2 ovals from one piece of acetate, so that makes it good value for money. But also, this is going to be this hinge mechanism on the inside, the bit that you're going to fold. And we have to find a way to attach this piece of acetate to the card blank. So you'll notice that there's just an amount. This can be as much or as little as you're happy to work with. On this particular card, the overlap here, I don't know if you can see, was a lot smaller. I've made it a little bit bigger this time just to work, to make it easier to work with. Now I'm making sure that those 2 ovals line up. Okay, so now we need to bring in our scoreboard, and just along this line here, we just need to make a score line. So there's no measuring as such, to say however much of this overhang is, just line this up against your score lines here and just create that score line. This will basically be the spine of your card, okay? Now, if you didn't want to make this with an acetate, then you could die cut this from a normal card blank, but just overhang your die. Imagine this was a card blank and this was already folded. This is the spine of your card. If you didn't want to use acetate, all you would need to do is just make sure that your die overhangs by a certain amount. Okay? So if you don't need to go through this scoring section if you're not using acetate, if that makes sense. So we have our die cut. Now what you can see we'll end up doing here is attaching these two together and creating that hinge to create ourselves our card blank, if that makes sense. Now before we attach these two together, we want to score along the centre of this acetate oval. So back to the scoreboard again. We measure halfway, or what would roughly look to be halfway, and we create our score line with our acetate. Now I've mentioned this before when I made the box last time I stenciled the sleigh, actually, that to score the acetate you really do need to sort of be a bit patient and go backwards and forwards with this. I'm using a plastic one. It may actually be easier for me to use a metal scorer. I've probably got that in the Ultimate 2. The Ultimate 2 has got 2 storage places, hasn't it, with a scoring tool on it, but I shall use this one instead. It might actually be easier. But so instead of really hurting your hand and going in sort of really tough with it to start with, just persevere and just go backwards and forwards, and you'll see the acetate start bending, and you know that that has started to work. So once the acetate started bending, you know you have that score line there, and then you can start just sort of manipulating that with your fingers just along that score line, and it will eventually take. Okay, as you can see. Again, if you're using just cardstock, then this it's a lot easier to score. So now we've got that in position, you can see this is our easel mechanism, and I'm hoping you can see this. It's working on the dark background, isn't it? So now we just need to attach these two sections together. Now, because you're working with acetate, you will need not a heavy duty as such, but I just like to be doubly sure that the acetate is stuck. So I'm using red liner tape, and I'm adding that to the little tab on the cardstock, and I'll just put another little bit there. And I will just make sure that that doesn't go anywhere by adding a little bit of glue on as well. So I'll just take those tabs off. And just before I add that down, I just add a little bit of security, just with a few dabs of glue. Of different ways of doing this. I think I'll do it like that just to make sure it all lines up. So line up your acetate on this side of the score line, because the score line actually has a bit of dimension. It's about a millimetre thick, isn't it, by the time you finish? So you want to line up your acetate on your side of the score line. That will allow a really nice fold to happen. You can just see that the advantage of having the tape allows it to stick, and that glue will give that the extra security. And because of where that is, you aren't actually going to see any of the adhesive. It's not going to be an area of the card that you'll be looking at. So you don't need to worry too much at that stage. So now we can think about putting our panel onto the front, and this is the area that we decorate for the card, as you can see now. Now obviously you can do this without using acetate, and you've probably seen me and Dawn demonstrate this, and also various design team members make easel cards all the time. But with the acetate you possibly do need to be a little bit more aware of how you're attaching this, obviously with the adhesive. And this is why I've created a couple of frames. Okay, obviously you're going to be putting some detail on the front, so that will hide some of the adhesive. but there's different ways of doing this. I mean, now this is just where your creativity comes in. I've cut myself a couple of layers, and this is from Lisa's Euphoria card. You can hopefully see that glitter there. So you can add a frame around this way. Let's put it down there. And you can see I'm actually using the polka dot frame. The acetate comes as a pack of 30, and you get 3 different designs. You get the clear, you get the polka dot, and you get the snow effect as well. But I like the snow effect. Sorry, the polka dot for this one. So you can either put a frame around this way. You can have a solid frame in, which I think works really nicely. And even just a sentiment on there I think would look lovely. You could have a smaller frame depending on the image that you're using. I think this actually is too small for the sleigh. I opted for this one on this card, but I think what I might do actually, just to change it up a little bit, I'll opt for this one. That works just nicely with the sleigh behind. I think that's really nice. So what I will do, I'm going to attach this to the acetate, but I'm only going to put the glue on the bottom half of this oval. And I'll show you for why in a second. If you only put a small amount of glue, it will dry clear, so the chances are you won't see it anyway. But I'm going to put that on there, because we then need to attach this to our easel mechanism. And when you turn this around, you're going to have this part of the die visible. You won't necessarily be looking at the back of the card, but you don't necessarily need the glue there. You might as well hide the glue and the workings of that on an area that can't be seen. So that's why I put the glue on the lower section there. Then we want this section to attach to the front of our card. So again, I shall add some glue. I'll do it sparingly, and I'll just do it under the glitter card layer, and then we can add that to our cardstock. Now I'm lining up the bubble circles around the edge of the oval. It does mean that your snowflakes or the polka dots don't line up, but I really don't think that matters too much at all in the whole scheme of things. We just need to hold that there a little bit, because gluing acetate to acetate, it does take, but you just need to be a little bit patient just to make sure that that holds. So there we have basically our easel card ready to decorate. So hopefully you can see that. Let me just wait for the, yeah. Okay. And now of course you can just go ahead and decorate. So I shall put, this time I shall probably 3D my sleigh onto the front here. I couldn't on this one because I was putting it straight onto acetate, but this time round I can. And there's no point making 2 cards the same if I can help it. So I shall add my 3D foam. You can have that sitting on the front. Now I think with the nature of these cards you don't necessarily need to have a stopper with this, because I think the memory of the acetate means it sort of really does hold its shape already. Now that's where that just pinged off. You do need to let that acetate just stick. Be quite gentle with that until that's completely dry. But you can decorate the bottom here. I'll just flip this round, and you can use any one of your frames that you've already cut. I think it would be quite nice to add here. I might actually go with that one on the bottom. On the bottom of this one I did actually use the larger frame as well, which I think gives a really nice detailing. I've got a sentiment which is from the designer collection. Again, these I think going to be on the show later on this evening and are also on Lisa's website. And I've just mounted that onto a piece of Euphoria glitter card that I've colour tinted with the opal blush actually to make it coordinate. So again, I think I'll put this on with some 3D foam. Again, because you're sticking this onto a glitter card also, you just need to be a little bit patient to wait for the glue to dry. I say it will take, but you just need to wait a little bit of time just for the glue just to harden off when you're using the glitter card. So we can put that on there. Now I would attach this with a piece of with some glue on there as well, just to secure that, but I won't do that just now. So we can put our sentiment on, and that can act as the little stopper. There's nothing stopping you putting your sentiment on this part of the card either actually. Again, it's how you interpret the card. I have a little snowflake that I've cut from the Robin set that I can add as decoration also. And I will just add one of these little enamel domes. Now this is something that Lisa's had in the past, but there's just a little area of that snowflake I wanted to cover, and that just does that perfectly for me. There we are, we have our easel card constructed with acetate. Now I think if you perhaps were feeling adventurous, you could even use acetate on the bottom, but I think the advantage of using a cardstock, it means that will sit nice and flat on the tabletop for you, and then you have the advantage and the beauty of the acetate around the rest of the card. So you can see how they look very different. One looks a lot more open than the other, but that's purely because of the layers I've chosen to use. Hopefully you can also see how it can be adapted to be made with the circle dies. The circle dies would work in exactly the same way. But I think it's actually quite unusual to see the oval dies used as an easel card. I really like that. It's a really nice sort of compact, lovely little card. And so thanks for joining me this afternoon. It's great to be back, and I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Take care.